In the black gulfs of the ancient past, long before the first human ever gazed up at the stars, there flourished a species whose story would shape the fate of the galaxy. On a bleak and irradiated world beneath a dying sun, the Necrontyr people were born into misery and brilliance in equal measure. Their lives were painfully short, bodies ravaged by endless radiation storms and wasting illnesses. Yet even as they built great cities of stone and metal, each Necrontyr lived under the shadow of inevitable death. Their tombs outnumbered their homes, and vast necropolises spread across their harsh homeland, a stark reminder that for all their knowledge and technology, they could not escape the frailty of their flesh. The Necrontyr's hearts burned with a singular desire to overcome the curse of their brief lives, to attain the immortality that fate had denied them. They became a people both embittered and driven. In the long ages of their early history, the Necrontyr mastered sciences and technologies wondrous to behold. They learned to harness the fires of their star and built great ships to voyage across the void. They established mighty dynasties, each ruled by a noble pharaoh or overlord, and these dynasties spread out from their homeworld in slow, crawling steps. Without the ability to travel faster than light through the immaterial warp, for the immaterium was anathema to them, they instead ventured between the stars in generations-long migrations. Bit by bit, their empire expanded, forging a realm of solemn splendor and sepulchral glory. Yet for all their achievements, the Necrontyr remained haunted by mortality. Their scientists and philosophers delved into every secret they could find in search of a cure for their short lifespans. It was in this quest for longevity that they first encountered another intelligent species, the Old Ones. The Old Ones were ancient beyond imagining, a civilization of powerful, cold-blooded beings who wielded psychic might and technology that defied understanding. They were effectively immortal, their lifespans spanning eons, and they roamed the galaxy with impunity, seeding new life on countless worlds. When the Necrontyr beheld the Old Ones, they saw in these ageless creatures the very antithesis of their own cursed existence. Jealousy and resentment took root in the Necrontyr heart. Why should these Old Ones enjoy eternal life, while the Necrontyr withered and died in agony beneath their cruel sun? The Necrontyr petitioned the Old Ones for the secrets of immortality, pleading for some remedy to their accursed fate. But the Old Ones, for all their wisdom, refused to share the gift of everlasting life. Perhaps they saw the volatility and bitterness in the Necrontyr soul, or perhaps it was simply not in their nature to intervene. Whatever the cause, that denial fanned the embers of the Necrontyr's hatred into a raging fire. Thus began the war in heaven, the first great war of the stars, a conflict that would drown the galaxy in blood and set the cosmos on a path of nightmare. In their fury and despair, the Necrontyr turned their unified dynasties against the Old Ones. The Triarch, the ruling council of three that led the Necrontyr civilization, believed an external enemy would bring unity to their fractious realms and give them a purpose beyond their internal strife. And indeed, as war was declared, the separatist Necrontyr realms put aside their quarrels and joined in common cause against the ancient masters of the galaxy. The Necrontyr fleets, emblazoned with proud heraldry and powered by the slow death of suns, set out to humble the nigh omnipotent Old Ones. It was a war fought with bitterness and spite. For all their advanced sciences, the Necrontyr were horribly outmatched. The Old Ones wielded powers the Necrontyr could barely comprehend, gateways through the immaterium that allowed instantaneous travel, and psychic energies that could turn reality itself against the Necrontyr fleets. Battle after battle, the Necrontyr armies were decimated, their proud legions ground to dust by the Old Ones' godlike might, worlds burned, and the Necrontyr's ambitious crusade faltered. In a few short centuries, a mere blink of an eye on a cosmic scale, the Necrontyr were driven to the brink of annihilation. Their once grand armies were reduced to embers. The triumphant Old Ones confined the ragged remnants of the Necrontyr to the distant edges of the galaxy, exiling them to remote halo stars far from the galactic core. In those dark reaches, under the dim glow of dying suns, the Necrontyr licked their wounds and nursed their hatred. The cost of the war in Heaven's first phase had been staggering. Countless generations of Necrontyr perished seeking vengeance and immortality, and all for nothing. Defeat and bitterness threatened to shatter the unity of their dynasties once more. Old divisions resurfaced. Civil wars known as the Wars of Secession erupted as lesser rulers sought independence or blamed one another for the catastrophe. The Silent King, Zarek, last in the line of Necrontyr monarchs bearing that title, saw his people fracturing. He knew that if something was not done, the Necrontyr would destroy themselves in internal strife, doomed to die out in bitterness and infighting, never to claim the destiny they felt was rightfully theirs. It was in this hour of desperation that the Necrontyr turned to the cosmos itself for salvation. They had long studied the stars, seeking any advantage or secret weapon to use against the Old Ones. In the heart of their own sun, they had observed enigmatic entities, vast consciousnesses of electromagnetic energy that swam in the nuclear fires of the stars. These were the Citan, the star gods, beings born at the dawn of creation, the very spirits of stars themselves. In normal circumstances, such entities were distant and indifferent, only dimly aware of material life. But the Necrontyr, with their genius and their despair, found a way to communicate with them. A chance stellar alignment, a cosmic fluke, or perhaps the Citan themselves were lured by the hatred radiating from the Necrontyr. Legends differ on how first contact was made. Some tales speak of a miraculous discovery by a Necrontyr astral probe. Others whisper that a particularly cunning Citan called the Deceiver orchestrated events from the shadows to bring about this meeting. However it happened, the Necrontyr soon found themselves in the presence of powers that dwarfed even the Old Ones. The Citan were vast, cosmic in scale, yet in their natural form they were diffuse and unable to interact with the physical universe in a focused way. The Necrontyr offered them a solution: corporeal bodies. Using the miraculous materials at their command, the Necrontyr forged living metal vessels, bodies fashioned from the etheric alloy called necrodermis, a self-repairing, shape-shifting metal of incredible resilience. Into these God-sculpted forms, the energy beings of the Citan eagerly poured themselves, finding for the first time the taste and sensation of real space. In gifting the Citan physical form, the Necrontyr believed they had found allies of unimaginable power, and indeed, once incarnated in living metal bodies towering like gods of golden steel, the Citan revealed abilities that shook the stars. The Necrontyr looked upon these shimmering star gods with reverence and terror. They named them Ingir, great ones in their tongue, and worshipped them as divine. Among the most terrible of the Citan was the Nightbringer, a being of darkness and dread whose coming was heralded by the extinguishing of suns. There was also the Deceiver, subtle and sly, who wore a mocking smile and promised much while concealing its true intent. Others had names now half forgotten to time: the Burning One, the Void Dragon, the Outsider, each a shard of divinity made manifest. The star gods accepted the adulation of the Necrontyr, finding in these desperate mortals both devoted servants and useful instruments of their own vengeance, for the Citan had their own grudge against the Old Ones, a primordial hate from an earlier age when the Old Ones had bested and scattered them. Now, aligned in purpose, the Necrontyr and their newly birthed star gods prepared to unleash a second, far more terrible phase of the war in heaven. It was the Citan that pointed the way to the prize the Necrontyr desired above all: immortality. They spoke to Sarek, the Silent King, with honeyed words, offering a pact that would deliver the Necrontyre from the curse of flesh. The Citan claimed they would grant eternal life and strength enough to topple the Old Ones forever. In return, they asked only for the Necrontyre's obedience and service in the war to come, a war of total revenge against the Old Ones and their creations. The Triarch deliberated over this fateful bargain. There were voices of caution, most notably Orican the Diviner, a counselor and astromancer whose prophetic gifts warned of a dark price hidden behind the star god's promise. But the majority of Necrontyre nobles, driven by hope, despair, and the intoxicating lure of life undying, agreed to the pact. In the end, the Silent King Zarek, bearing the desperation of his entire race on his shoulders, made the ultimate decision. He struck the covenant with the Citan, sealing the doom and destiny of his people in one fell decree. What followed is a horror few mortal minds can comprehend. The Necrontyre called it the biotransference, a grand and terrible ritual enacted on a colossal scale. The star gods hungered for the abundant life essence of mortal souls, and the Necrontyre yearned to escape their weak flesh. So, the dreadful pact was fulfilled. Necrontyre across the galaxy, from the highest royal to the lowliest common citizen, were marched in endless processions into great biofurnaces and spirit factories. Their bodies were consumed by emerald fire, flesh and bone disintegrated in agonizing heat. Their living souls, the very spark of their being, were ripped from mortal flesh and drawn into the furnace of immortality. In place of their perishable forms, the Necrontyre's consciousnesses were encased in undying bodies of necrodermis, each wrought in the semblance of its former self, but now unyielding and eternal. As this great work was done, the star gods glutted themselves on the spiritual energy released by the dying Necrontyre. The skies of Necrontyre worlds darkened with crackling storms as trillions of souls were devoured. The Citan grew bloated and luminous with power, shining like malicious new stars in the heavens. Zarek himself underwent the process, trading his mortal flesh for a body of immortal alloy. And in that moment, too late, the Silent King understood the atrocity that had been unleashed. Immortality had been granted, yes, but at a cost beyond measure. They had escaped the ravages of time only to become prisoners of a new and horrible eternity. The Necrontyre people were essentially destroyed by this act, and something else was born in their stead. Those who emerged from the biotransference were Necrontyre no longer. In the blazing crucible of that transaction, the Necrontyre race was stripped of all that made it warm and vital. What stumbled forth from the smoke and ashes were the Necrons, deathless metal husks animated by only the faintest echo of what had once been a living mind. The glorious immortality the Silent King had been promised turned out to be a cruel perversion of life. Their bodies were now incorruptible, immune to time's decay and endowed with unearthly strength, but their minds and spirits paid the price. With their souls devoured by the Citan's insatiable hunger, the vast majority of Necrons found themselves diminished, hollow echoes of their former selves. Only a few, the strongest-willed and highest-ranking nobles, retained a semblance of individuality and intellect. Zarek himself was among these fortunate, or perhaps unfortunate few, fully aware of the magnitude of his folly. The grand dream of the Necrontyre had given birth to an undying nightmare. The Necron legions arose as a unified force at last, unified not by patriotic fervor or triumphal purpose, but by the cold will of their new star god masters and the command protocols etched into their metal brains. Emotions faded from them. Even the memory of sensation grew distant and unreal. No pity, no remorse, no joy or creativity remained to this new mechanical species. They became an army of immortal automata, each warrior's eyes glowing with lifeless emerald light, and each step a precise, relentless advance. The star gods exulted, for now they had an army that could never tire, never age, and never disobey. The Necrons' free will was chained to the whims of their new masters. The Silent King's people had become slaves in all but name to the very powers they had bargained with. So began the terrible second act of the war in heaven. With hate undimmed and empowered by betrayal, the Citan and their Necron servants struck at the Old Ones with fury unparalleled. No longer were the Necrontyr frail beings of flesh. Now they were immortal machine conquerors, wielding weapons and starships of impossible potency. Where once the Old Ones had defeated the Necrontyr with ease, now they found themselves facing a nightmare reborn. Necron warships, now guided by the immeasurable technological mastery of the Citan, traversed the stars in the blink of an eye. In moments, fleets would jump across the galaxy through starlight corridors unknown to any other race, appearing without warning in orbit above unsuspecting worlds. The Necrons deployed weapons of godlike destruction, some capable of siphoning the energy of suns or snuffing them out entirely, others that could crack the crust of a planet or create singularities on the battlefield. Ancient stars went supernova at their whim. Planets were reduced to cinders or ground into lifeless asteroids. The Old Ones, for all their millennia of knowledge, were caught off guard by the sheer scale of devastation unleashed by the awakened star gods and their chosen instruments of vengeance. Legends say that this war spanned centuries, perhaps millennia, and its battlefields were not only planets and star systems, but the hidden dimensions between them. The Necrons, guided by their Citan masters, even learned to invade the secret webway passages that the Old Ones had long used for instantaneous travel. With the aid of a ferocious star god known as Nyadrazatha, the Burning One, they infiltrated the webway and assailed the Old Ones in their sanctuaries beyond the veil of normal space. The Old Ones fought desperately, creating new life forms to serve as soldiers in this cosmic conflict. In their genetic laboratories, they uplifted and armed younger races with potent psychic abilities, hoping to exploit the one weakness of the Citan: vulnerability to the energies of the warp. Among these creations were the beings who would become the Aeldari, Eldar, gifted with long life and strong souls. The hardy Krork, warlike giants who would one day devolve into the Orcs, and other species lost to time such as the reptilian Khanib and the shadowy, poisonsome Rashan. To these new warriors, the Old Ones taught the arts of psychic war, turning their very thoughts and emotions into weapons. For a time, the tide seemed to turn. The psychic might of the Old Ones' young protégés brought pain to the Citan, for those star-spawned gods loathed and feared the raw chaos of the immaterium. On battlefields wreathed in unreal colors and roiling warp storms, the Necron legions faced foes who could strike not only at their metal bodies, but at their animating spirits. It was anathema to them. The Citan recoiled as the Old Ones' new champions unleashed powers drawn from beyond the veil of reality. The war became a clash of soul-fueled sorcery against cold, unfeeling technology, a conflict that scarred the very fabric of existence. And in the midst of this strife, something unforeseen and terrible took shape. All the death, pain, and psychic tumult of the war in heaven began to saturate the immaterium. The warp, once a relatively calm realm in the early days of the galaxy, was transformed into a boiling cauldron of rage and despair. The psychic backlash of genocide and suffering coalesced into entities of its own, the first faint stirrings of what would become the Chaos Gods and their demonic legions. The immaterial dimension became a twisting, howling mirror of the physical carnage, birthing predators formed of nightmare and shadow. As if this were not disaster enough for the Old Ones, an even more dire threat emerged from the warp's madness. The enslavers, foul parasitic warp spawn, poured into reality through the minds of the vulnerable. These nightmare creatures could dominate the thoughts of psychers and use them as living portals, allowing hordes of enslavers and other warp entities to invade the material realm. In their desperation to combat the Necrons, the Old Ones had inadvertently opened the floodgates of the warp's chaos. Now their own creations fell victim to possession and corruption by these uncontrolled warp spawn. Civilizations that had survived Necron planet killers were ripped apart from within by enslaver plague and demonic madness. World after world, once verdant planets nurtured by the Old Ones, descended into anarchy and horror without a single Necron shot being fired. The proud and ancient lords of the stars saw their dominion crumbling from both without and within, besieged by implacable Necron armies on one front and by the ravening insanity of the warp on the other. Amid this mounting catastrophe, the C'tan reveled in destruction. They feasted on life force as the Necron armies carried out great cullings of the remaining living worlds. These were the infamous Red Harvests, genocidal sweeps across the stars where entire species were slaughtered to sate the insatiable hunger of the star gods. The Necrons became reapers of souls, harvesting the essence of billions at the behest of their cosmic masters. Suns were dimmed from the energies drained to feed C'tan appetites, and tomb world vaults filled with the silent dead of unnumbered civilizations. The galaxy spiraled toward utter devastation. Once lush planets nurtured by the Old Ones were reduced to lifeless husks. The civilization of the Old Ones themselves, architects of so many intelligent species, buckled and collapsed under the strain. Some Old Ones were hunted down and slain by the C'tan, consumed body and soul by beings who now truly embodied the aspect of death. Others were overwhelmed by the tides of warp-spawned horrors, or perhaps even chose to flee reality altogether, vanishing into the cosmic night, never to return. One by one, the lights of that ancient empire guttered out. In the end, the Old Ones died in darkness, their last acts and final fates lost to time and myth. At long last, the Necrons and their star gods had achieved the unthinkable. The Old Ones were defeated, their eons-long dominion brought to a bloody end. But victory tasted of ashes. The galaxy was a ruin. The cost of this triumph was beyond calculation. Ecosystems ravaged, the warp itself turned hostile, and the Necrons left standing amidst the desolation as soulless instruments of higher powers. It was in this moment, with the Old Ones gone and nothing worthy left to slaughter, that the silent King Zarek's resolve hardened into an unexpected decision. For years, Zarek had obeyed the C'tan, playing the part of dutiful servant while bitterness festered in his heart. But in the silence that followed the war's apocalyptic crescendo, he confronted the magnitude of what had happened. The Necrontyrs' ancient vendetta was over, yet they had lost everything that made their victory meaningful. All that remained was an eternity of servitude to inhuman gods who saw them as nothing more than tools or playthings. Zarek's sorrow and guilt crystallized into a cold, unyielding fury, not the reckless fury of youth, but a grave and measured wrath. The star gods had thought the Necrons completely under control, but they had not reckoned with the silent king's undiminished intellect or the depth of his regret. In the shadows, Zarek began to rally the strongest of his remaining generals and nobles, those whose minds were still their own. He shared with them a bold plan, the overthrow of the C'tan themselves. The Necrons had become masters of the material universe, and in their arsenal were weapons that could unmake even the fabric of creation, if they could not destroy the star gods outright. For how does one kill an immortal being of energy? They would do the next best thing. They would shatter the gods into pieces. The rebellion came suddenly and without warning. Perhaps the C'tan, glutted on souls and drunk with victory, had grown complacent. At Zarek's secret signal, the Necron legions that had ravaged the galaxy now turned on their so-called deities in a carefully coordinated uprising. using weapons that focused the fundamental forces of the universe, devices forged in Cyclopean Necron forges and powered by the extracted hearts of stars. The Necrons unleashed the unthinkable upon their former masters. One by one, the C'tan were caught in unimaginable energy traps and reality-cracking implosions. Though nearly impossible to destroy, the star gods could not withstand the concentrated onslaught of the living cosmos turned against them. They were not killed, for beings of their nature can perhaps never truly be extinguished, but they were broken. Each C'tan was blasted apart into countless fragments, their essence scattered and imprisoned in shards of the necrodermis that had once given them form. These shattered pieces, still godlike in power but stripped of unified consciousness, were swiftly trapped within arcane devices called tesseract labyrinths. In the span of a moment, the star god's dominion ended, and the Necrons were free of their chains. Yet what freedom was this? They had overthrown their gods, only to find themselves in a universe left hollow by apocalypse. The old ones were gone. The younger races created as soldiers in the war had either perished in the ensuing catastrophes or been reduced to primitive, frightened remnants. And the Necrons themselves were utterly spent. They had achieved vengeance for an ancient wrong, but in doing so had lost their own souls and sense of purpose. The Silent King looked upon a galaxy in ruin and foresaw that, in the coming epochs, new species would inevitably arise to claim the mantle of the fallen old ones. The Necrons, weary and greatly reduced in number, could not hope to rule the stars in this moment. Already the resilient Eldar, the psychic heirs of the old ones, were clearly poised to flourish and spread across the void. In time, Zarek knew, the Eldar and other younger races would grow mighty, perhaps even to the point of challenging the Necrons as the old ones once did. And so Zarek made a final monumental decision to safeguard the future of his people. The Necrons would withdraw from the galaxy and wait. They would pass into a great slumber, a hibernation deep beneath the surfaces of secure worlds, and let the ages flow by like a cleansing tide. In those millions of years, the Silent King gambled. The star-spanning empires of the young races would rise and fall. The time of the Eldar would come, and inevitably pass. Even the roiling tumult of the warp might calm in time from the wounds of the war. When the Necrons awoke, it would be to a galaxy ripe for their return, where no empire of flesh could challenge them, and where their own strength could be renewed far from the memory of defeat. Across countless worlds, the Necrons prepared their exodus from the living realm. The great cities of the Necrontyr, already sepulchral and tomb-like in architecture, were transformed into massive stasis crypts. Entire populations marched voluntarily into status chambers, lying down in orderly rows within tiered vaults to sleep away the eons. The Silent King sent out a last directive that resonated through the command codes of the Necron race: to slumber, to endure, and to be ready for the day of reawakening. The greatest of tomb worlds were sealed with impregnable doors of living metal and hidden by cloaking technologies, buried under mountains or sunk beneath oceans, or entombed within barren moons. Automated guardians, the Canoptech constructs, swarms of insect-like machines, were left to maintain and defend the sleeping legions over the long dark. Entire continents were reshaped into geometries of silent vaults, and weapons of unimaginable power were locked away in armoriums, awaiting the time they would once again be needed. Immense subterranean warehouses stored the Necron armies for the millions of years they intended to remain inactive. Using their mastery of science and dimensional geometry, the Necrons built temporal stasis fields into their tombs that would keep their technology preserved and their bodies uncorrupted by time. Before Zarek himself joined his people in slumber, he took one last action as Silent King. Filled with remorse and weary beyond measure, he severed the overarching command protocols that bound all Necrons to his will. He destroyed the master control program by which he and the Triarch could dominate the minds of every Necron warrior. In so doing, he ensured that when the Necrons eventually awoke, they would possess the freedom to forge their own destinies, for better or worse, rather than remain puppets dancing to a single tune. It was an act of both contrition and hope, at once an apology for the horror he had wrought upon his people, and a final trust in their ability to find their own path once freed from centralized tyranny. With that, Sharek abdicated his throne, bearing the burden of guilt for the biotransference and the genocide of the war in heaven. The Silent King did not join his subjects in their tombs. Instead, he took to the stars in a lone vessel and vanished into the blackness between galaxies, seeking whatever solace or penance he could in self-imposed exile. And so the Necrons slept. The galaxy turned, millennia piling upon millennia, while the once mighty Necron dynasties lay silent in their hidden sepulchres. 60 million years passed like a whisper of dust in a crypt. In that time, the face of the galaxy changed beyond recognition. The proud Eldar rose to stunning heights of power, crafting an empire of art and sorcery across the stars, only to fall tragically by their own hands with the birth of the chaos god Slaanesh. Human beings, mere beasts in the Necrons' heyday, evolved into a starfaring species and eventually built a vast imperium across the galaxy's breadth. The Orcs, crude inheritors of the Krork legacy, multiplied into endless green hordes that plagued every corner of space. The warp storms ebbed and flowed, and new dark powers, the chaos gods, claimed dominion in the immaterium, spreading their malice wherever mortals let their ambition or despair open a door to the beyond. Through all these epochs, the Necrons remained as silent as the grave, entombed in their vaults and untouched by the passage of time. Many tomb worlds were lost in the interim, some destroyed by supernovae or planetary cataclysms, others discovered and defiled by enterprising aliens, and still others simply falling victim to malfunction and decay, despite the tireless efforts of Canoptech caretakers. Whole legions perished in dreamless sleep as their stasis crypts failed or were smashed by chance or design, but countless other tomb worlds endured, and the Necron race, though diminished, persisted through the aeons of oblivion, waiting for the promised hour of rebirth. And then, after uncounted ages, the Silent King's gamble began to pay off. The great sleep began to end. The stars had shifted, the mighty empires of the Eldar had come and gone, and the younger civilizations now squabbled over the galaxy's carcass. It was time. Across the cold void, dormant tomb worlds stirred, not all at once, but gradually, like the slow, shuddering intake of breath after a long near-death torpor. Deep beneath a planet's surface, faint power cores flickered alight in lightless chambers. Canoptech scarab swarms, dutiful and tireless, scuttled through vast halls to awaken ancient machinery and repair failing systems. Vault doors the size of city blocks ground open with thunderous echoes in the dark, and ranks of skeletal warriors reactivated, their eyes rekindling to an eerie green glow. One by one, Necron overlords and lords awoke upon their thrones or in ornate sarcophagi, shaking off the dust of tens of millions of years. The long silence of the Necrons was ending, and with it the galaxy's brief respite from their wrath. The reawakening did not happen uniformly. On some worlds, the programmed protocols worked flawlessly, and entire legions rose in unison under the absolute rule of their overlord. On others, things went awry. Some tombs malfunctioned and never opened at all, their inhabitants trapped in eternal stasis or crumbling to nothing as systems failed. A few Necron nobles awoke alone to find their armies long since decayed around them, leaving them maddened sovereigns of empty, dust-choked halls. In certain places, seismic upheavals or orbital catastrophes had cracked open tomb vaults prematurely, causing Necrons to emerge disoriented, even deranged. Indeed, The long slumber took a toll on many Necron minds. Some awoke with fragmented memories or glitch-ridden engrams that instilled bizarre behavior. There were Necron lords who believed themselves still living in the age before biotransference, reenacting ancient court rituals in the ruins of their tomb complexes. Others awoke consumed by singular obsessions, perhaps an overwhelming urge to exterminate all life or to recover every lost relic of their former glory, or other monomanias born of a millennia-long dream. But whatever their state of mind, those Necrons who rose still possessed the undying bodies and formidable technology of their kind. Even a delusional Necron warlord is a thing of terrifying power, and a Necron army, organized or not, is a nightmare given form to the mortals of the 41st millennium. The galaxy learned of the Necrons' return in blood and terror. In the late 41st millennium, on remote colony worlds and forgotten planets at the galaxy's edge, stories emerged of implacable, inhuman legions rising from beneath the ground. One of the earliest recorded encounters occurred on Sanctuary 101, a barren world where a convent of the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, maintained a holy bastion. Without warning, metallic warriors emerged from the desert sands around the fortress and advanced without haste, yet without pause. The bolter fire and melta-blasts of the startled defenders did nothing to permanently halt them. The attackers simply rebuilt themselves and continued, unhindered by wounds that would fell any living creature. The Necrons closed in, eerie green beams of Gauss energy reducing flesh and ceramite armor to bubbling slag in seconds. In a single night of horror, the valiant sisters of Sanctuary 101 were slaughtered to the last woman. When Imperial relief forces eventually arrived, they found only silence and charred bones. The attackers had vanished back into the sands beneath the fortress, leaving nothing but death in their wake. Across the galaxy, similar incidents multiplied, settlements wiped out overnight, Imperial outposts suddenly falling silent. At first, the Imperium of Man grasped only that some new Xenos threat had arisen. Panic and superstition spread on frontier worlds, whispers of living metal devils, of unkillable machines that rose from the tomb to slaughter the living. Inquisitors and tech scholars pieced together scraps of data and fragments of Eldar lore, slowly coming to realize that this new threat was in truth a primeval one, perhaps the oldest enemy of life still lurking in the galaxy. In dread silence they had waited, and now they were coming to reclaim what they lost. To the awoken Necrons, the Imperium and all the younger races were but interlopers, living amidst the ruins of what had once been theirs. They looked upon the teeming billions of humanity or the squabbling orc hordes and saw only vermin infesting the palaces of their forebears. Each Necron dynasty thus began campaigns to reclaim its ancient domains, whether those worlds were now prime hive worlds of the Imperium or overgrown jungles overrun by orcs. The Necrons set about their reconquest with cold and methodical efficiency. Many Tomb World awakenings followed a chillingly similar pattern. First, silent infiltrators, canoptech wraiths in their phase-shifted forms or swarms of scarabs, would slip through shadows and breach defenses, cutting power grids and sabotaging communications. Next would come sudden blackouts and the collapse of planetary infrastructure as Necron devices choked off energy and silenced Vox networks. Then, seemingly from nowhere, the Necron legions would emerge. Phalanxes of gleaming skeletal warriors marched with mechanical precision, advancing in perfect unison upon population centers or strategic targets. Resistance, no matter how fierce, was systematically ground down. After the initial shock of these eruptions, some Imperial commanders attempted counter-assaults to root out the Necrons. They hurled armored columns and elite space marines at the Necron hosts, seeking to overwhelm the invaders with sheer firepower and valor. Time and again, the counter-assaults would seem to succeed at first. Necron warriors blasted apart, Necron skimmers and walkers toppled in smoking ruin. But as soon as the attackers pressed forward, the fallen Necrons would simply glow with sickly light and rise up once more. Scorched limbs knit back together from swirling living metal. Severed heads floated up and reattached to sundered torsos. What should have been killing blows proved to be only temporary setbacks. It was as though the Necrons had to be killed twice, thrice, or endlessly, and with each resurgence, the human soldiers' morale faltered further. Imperial records from these early battles are filled with the despairing last transmissions of commanders facing Necrons. One fragment recovered from a doomed Imperial Guard outpost describes the horror. "Emperor, preserve us. We shot them to pieces and still they come. Even the severed ones are crawling, fighting on. They just won't die." The Necrons' so-called reanimation protocols, their inbuilt self-repair systems, made them virtually unstoppable unless utterly disintegrated. And disintegration was precisely what their own weaponry inflicted on their foes. Even the humblest Necron warrior carries a terrifying gun known as a Gauss flare, which emits coruscating green lightning that strips a target's molecules apart, layer by layer. Victims caught in a Gauss beam are flayed alive in moments, flesh, bone, and steel unraveling in crackling emerald light. A Space Marine's power armor, the pride of the Imperium's armories, offers little protection. It bubbles away under the Gauss beam's caress, and the superhuman warrior within is then shredded at the atomic level. To face Necron fire is to confront a weapon that renders cover useless and the stoutest armor irrelevant. A truly terrifying realization for those used to more conventional foes. In battle, the Necrons wield not only their legions of infantry, but also esoteric war machines, the likes of which few in the galaxy have seen. Monoliths, vast floating siege pyramids, often herald a major Necron assault. A monolith will materialize via dimensional translocation, appearing suddenly on the battlefield in a haze of distortion. Composed of the same living metal as Necron soldiers, a monolith is virtually impervious to harm, shrugging off firepower that would obliterate a battle tank. From its facets protrude Gauss flux projectors that spit arcs of green lightning in all directions, scything through infantry and vehicles with indiscriminate wrath. At its apex, a monolith houses a crystal matrix capable of unleashing a particle whip, a searing lance of energy that can gouge a smoking crater where ranks of enemies once stood. And at the monolith's core is its eternity gate, a great portal set in the pyramid's face. Through this swirling gateway, Necron warriors can be instantaneously deployed from their tombs onto the battlefield. An assaulting monolith can suddenly disgorge entire phalanxes into the heart of an enemy stronghold, catching defenders completely off guard. Each monolith is not only a weapon of war, but a symbol of Necron supremacy, an imposing icon of an ancient empire floating implacably above the ground as lesser beings scatter in panic below. While a monolith is the spear tip of many Necron invasions, it is far from the only horror in their arsenal. Necron cryptechs, masters of techno-sorcery, deploy arcane devices that defy the laws of physics. With a gesture, a cryptech can cause flesh to wither into dust or summon eldritch bolts of energy that leap between foes. Specialized cryptechs known as chronomancers manipulate time itself on the battlefield, freezing opponents in moments of time or shielding Necron units by phasing them a few seconds out of sync with reality. The sky above a battle might darken as Necron doom scythes scream overhead, razor-edged fighter craft whose weapons can carve through entire armored columns with beams of actinic light. On the ground, towering Necron constructs join the fray. Insectile triarch stalkers stride on spidery legs, their targeting relays coordinating deadly volleys for Necron infantry. Sinister canoptech wraiths phase in and out of reality, passing effortlessly through walls and shields to eviscerate backline units with their claws, and swarms of scarabs boil forth to devour vehicles molecule by molecule. Amidst their legions, Necron lords and overlords direct the battle, wielding ancient and terrible relics. War scythes crackling with energy cleave through adamantine plating with ease. Some overlords bear resurrection orbs that can reanimate fallen Necron warriors mid-battle, or nightmare shroud devices that project hallucinations of terror into the minds of their enemies. It is not uncommon for a Necron overlord to stride through the smoke of war, wreathed in a protective haze of disruption fields and attended by crackling canoptek bodyguards, appearing every bit a deathless king from an age of nightmares, reborn. Order, unity, obedience. We taught the galaxy these things long ago, and we will do so again. These defiant words of Imhotep the Stormlord, one of the greatest Necron overlords to awaken, echoed the intent of his kind as they reclaimed their realm. Imhotep, Pharaon of the mighty Sautek dynasty, began a campaign of conquest in the late 41st millennium that brought dozens of star systems under Necron dominion. He is a peerless strategist, treating war as a grand calculation in which every move and counter-move is anticipated. Under his command, Necron legions advanced with mathematical precision, outmaneuvering and outthinking every opponent. Many an Imperial commander underestimated Imhotep's patient, methodical approach, only to find that every feint and gambit had been foreseen by the Stormlord long before the first shot was fired, and Imhotep was but one overlord among many. Across the galaxy, other Necron dynasties rose from slumber, each with its own ancient heraldry, its own pride and peculiarities. The Nephrec dynasty, for instance, whose nobles swathed themselves in gold, pursued mastery of transdimensional energies. Their warriors could transmute into living light to reposition instantly on the battlefield. The crimson-marked Novak dynasty awoke with an insatiable thirst for battle. Its legions favored brutal close combat, tearing foes apart with hyperphase blades and claws in frenzied assaults that seemed at odds with Necron precision, as if making up for millennia of lost slaughter. The Mephrit dynasty, heirs of a star-scorched world, powered their weapons with the energy of captured suns. Their philosophy brooked no half-measures, and they sought to scour the galaxy clean with the purifying fire of starlight. Countless other dynasties, large and small, each with unique strategies and objectives, began to stake their claims. Some cooperated or formed alliances of convenience, while others clashed in cold civil wars over territory, pride, or ancient feuds carried over from the Necrontyr era. Yet above all these lords and kingdoms loomed the memory of the Triarch and the question of the Silent King's will. For 60 million years, the Necrons had slumbered without a supreme ruler, following only the last command set down before the Great Sleep. Now whispers spread among awakened courtiers that Sarek, the Silent King himself, had returned from exile. These whispers were true. After long ages wandering in the intergalactic void, witnessing from afar the rise and fall of empires, Sarek had indeed come back. His timing was no accident. In his exile, the Silent King had encountered something dire in the darkness beyond the galaxy, a horror that even the Necrons had not faced before. He had drifted in the path of the Tyranids, an extra-galactic swarm of all-devouring organisms, and learned of their existence. In the Tyranids, Sarek perceived a threat that could consume not only the younger civilizations of the galaxy, but the Necrons and their hard-won domains as well. What would be the point of reclaiming the galaxy if another extragalactic force would soon strip it to the bone? With grim purpose, the Silent King turned back toward his ancient home, determined to guide his people against this oncoming storm and any other that might threaten the Necron future. Sarek kept his return subtle at first. Ever the master strategist, he did not simply appear and demand the fealty of the dynasties. He knew well that in his absence the Necron nobles had grown willful and proud. Instead, he moved in secret, dispatching his loyal agents, the Triarch Praetorians, to enforce a measure of the old order. These Praetorians had never entered the Great Sleep. They remained active through the ages, guardians of Necron law and tradition who watched over the silent tombs. Now they carried the Silent King's directives across the stars, awakening tombs that still slumbered and urging disparate dynasties to lend their strength to Zarek's cause. In some cases, the Silent King himself visited potentates of particularly powerful dynasties, concealing his identity and testing their loyalties. Slowly but steadily, he began to weave together a coalition for the defense of the galaxy, or at least the defense of the Necrons' interests within it. Not all Necron rulers accepted Zarek's authority or vision. After all, it was the Silent King's decisions that had led them into biotransference and servitude to the Citan. There were those who had not forgotten or forgiven that ancient betrayal. Moreover, many overlords were fiercely independent and saw themselves as the rightful, supreme rulers of their domains. Imhotep, the Stormlord, for one, had no desire to bend the knee to any king. He considered himself the architect of Necron resurgence and bristled at the notion of subordinating his Sautek dynasty to another's agenda. This tension eventually erupted into conflict. Imhotep and dynasties loyal to him began to resist the Silent King's edicts, leading to a subtle but far-reaching Necron civil war. Assassinations and intrigues played out in the shadows, and in certain remote battlefields, Necron legions clashed against one another, phalanx against phalanx, over irreconcilable ambitions. It was a war fought mostly in silence and stealth, invisible to the younger races, but it threatened to undermine Zarek's efforts to unify his people when unity was needed most. Still, the Silent King persisted, convinced that without a measure of cohesion, the Necrons would be devoured piecemeal by the encroaching horrors of the universe. Meanwhile, the wars with the upstart species continued unabated. The Imperium of Man soon realized that the Necron threat was not confined to a few unlucky frontier worlds, but was a widespread and growing danger. Imperial forces clashed with Necrons on multiple fronts. The Ultramarines chapter of Space Marines, for instance, fought a desperate campaign on the ice world of Damnos, where Necrons had awoken beneath the mines that humans had built above their tombs. Though the Ultramarines eventually evacuated the surviving populace and collapsed the Necron catacombs, their victory was only temporary. In a matter of years, the Necrons reconstituted and reclaimed the ruined planet, forcing the Imperium to quarantine the entire system. In another grim confrontation, a tomb world in the Orpheus sector transformed itself into a cosmic dreadnought. The fabled World Engine, a mobile artificial planet surrounded by impenetrable energy shields. This world engine cut a swath of destruction through Imperial space, annihilating every fleet sent against it. It was ultimately stopped only by the sacrificial heroism of the Astral Knights Space Marine chapter, who rammed their vessels into the world engine's core and detonated them from within, destroying both the engine and themselves. Such episodes taught the Imperium a fearful respect for Necron supremacy in technology and single-mindedness in strategy. The Eldar, ancient enemies of the Ingir in their mythology, also found themselves face to face with the return of their oldest nightmares. Eldar Farseers, peering into the skeins of fate, saw the once distant shadows of the Necrons looming again. On several occasions, Necron forces attacked Eldar maiden worlds and outposts. In one notable battle, a Necron army invaded an Exodite world, an Eldar colony planet, to strip it of resources, and Eldar warriors, including Aspect warriors and even Harlequin troops, fought desperately to repel them. Though highly advanced and mobile, Eldar forces struggled against Necrons for a simple reason. To use their most devastating weapons, the Eldar had to draw deeply upon the warp, and doing so risked disaster given the precarious state of their souls. An Eldar psyker might unleash a psychic tempest to shatter a Necron phalanx, only to attract the hungry gaze of Slaanesh, or find their mind the target of a lurking Citan shard. Thus, the Eldar had to fight the Necrons with one arm metaphorically tied behind their back, relying on wits and speed over raw power. Some Eldar seers believed that the reawakening of the Necrons was a prelude to an even greater catastrophe, a sign that the final act in the galaxy's long drama was approaching, when all the old players, Eldar, Necron, perhaps even Old Ones through their legacy, would meet their doom or salvation. Even the young and ambitious Toh Empire, expanding on the galaxy's eastern fringe, encountered the Necrons and learned to fear them. At first, the Toh, being pragmatic and diplomatic, attempted to contact the Necrons and negotiate, or at least understand their motives. These attempts met with cold silence or immediate violence. On the world of Shadrag, for example, a Toh colonization fleet landed to establish a new settlement, only to awaken a Necron tomb beneath the planet's crust. Legions of Necron warriors eradicated the colony within days. The Toh Firecast forces that responded found themselves hopelessly outmatched. Their high-energy weapons and battle suits, impressive by younger race standards, were but crude toys to the Necrons. Entire cadres were cut down in moments by Gauss fire, and not even the heroic sacrifice of their elite crisis suit teams could turn the tide. Interestingly, however, the Necrons did not always immediately exterminate every last Toh. In some encounters, certain Necron units would capture key individuals alive and take them into the depths for purposes unknown. Those few who escaped reported dispassionate Necron figures observing and experimenting on captives. This behavior was later attributed to the machinations of Illuminor Serras, a Necron cryptech obsessed with unlocking the secrets of life. Serras conducted horrific experiments on living specimens of many species, human, Eldar, Toh, Orc, in an effort to refine the biotransference process or perhaps to elevate the Necron form even further. To the Toh, who had never known such utter mercilessness, the Necrons became a byword for implacable dread, an enemy that could not be bargained with, only fought to the bitter end. Throughout these conflicts, there were rare moments of unlikely alliance, flickers of cooperation born of sheer necessity. On the verge of the 42nd millennium, the Imperium's Blood Angels space marines found their homeworld of Baal assaulted by the greatest threat they had ever faced, a massive tendril of the Tyranid hive fleet Leviathan. As the skies blackened with trillions of Xenos organisms, help came from an unexpected quarter. Anrakir the Traveler, a roving Necron overlord with a keen interest in preserving the galaxy's order, so that he might rule it later, led a host of Necron warriors from the Mefrit dynasty to aid in Baal's defense. For the first time, Necron phalanxes and Adeptus Astartes fought side by side. Gauss beams and bolt rounds converged upon the chitinous hordes, and the alien invaders were cut down in untold numbers. When the Tyranids were driven off from that battlefield, Anrakir withdrew, exchanging only the barest acknowledgement with Commander Dante of the Blood Angels. No formal truce was declared, no promises made, simply a moment of pragmatic alliance, born of mutual understanding that the Devourer would consume victor and vanquished alike. It was a rare glimmer of rationality in a galaxy of eternal war. Similarly, elsewhere in the galaxy, the Necrons have on occasion helped to stem the tide of chaos, though never out of altruism. During the 13th Black Crusade, as Abaddon's forces sought to tear open the Cadian Gate, strange Necron constructs activated on the planet Cadia. These were the famed Cadian pylons, massive obelisks of black stone that had stood inert for millennia, revealed at last to be Necron devices designed to stabilize the warp. In the final desperate hours before Cadia's fall, a peculiar alliance was struck. A Necron overlord known as Trazyn the Infinite momentarily fought alongside Imperial survivors, lending the power of captured artifacts and warriors from his personal collection to hold back the demon hordes. Inquisitor Greyfax, a devout servant of the Imperium, found herself fighting in concert with this mysterious Necron benefactor to activate the remaining pylons. For a brief time, the Necron technology pushed back the warp storm, severing demonic reinforcements and weakening chaos onslaught. In the end, Cadia was destroyed, the pylons shattered and the planet sundered, but the incident demonstrated that the Necrons possessed the means to accomplish what the Imperium desperately dreamed of, to suppress the warp's influence. Of course, the Necrons sought this goal not to save humanity or any other race, but to rid the galaxy of the abominations of chaos for their own purposes. Still, from the perspective of the Imperium, it was a moment where the enemy of their enemy acted almost like a friend. It raised the tantalizing notion that in the face of galaxy-ending threats, even the ancient Necrons might set aside their contempt for the younger races, at least temporarily. Such episodes prompt a profound question. What are the ultimate goals of the Necrons now that they have awoken? In the current era of the 41st millennium and on into the 42nd, what do these undying beings intend for the galaxy and their place in it? The simplest answer is dominance. The Necrons seek to reassert the infinite empire they once held. From their perspective, the galaxy is rightfully theirs. Every star system, every planet that hosted a Necron-tier dynasty in ages past, they mean to reclaim. The upstart civilizations of Man, Eldar, To, and others are squatters living among the ruins of a far greater society. Many Necron overlords pursue this goal single-mindedly. They envision a future where the Necron dynasties once again rule the stars unchallenged, and all lesser species either bend the knee, are used as cattle or resources, or are exterminated outright. To these Necron lords, the current disorder in the galaxy, the endless wars, the chaos incursions, the tyrannid swarms, is a direct result of their absence. They taught the galaxy order once, and in their view, only by their hand will order be restored. The younger races, by contrast, naturally see this as nothing less than a bid for galactic tyranny, a doom to be averted at all costs. Beneath this overarching imperial ambition, however, lie more complex motives. The Silent King's return suggests that at least one of their aims is survival, not just of individuals, but of the Necron race as a whole, in the face of apocalyptic threats. Sharek did not break eons of solitude simply to conquer a weakened Imperium. He returned because he foresaw the rise of the Tyranids and perhaps other universe-ending dangers. His actions indicate a desire to marshal the Necrons to defend the galaxy, or at least defend the Necrons' stake in it, from being consumed or overrun by forces even they might not withstand alone. In this sense, paradoxical as it may sound, the Necrons could become unexpected bulwarks against cosmic threats. Already, Necron technology is being wielded to hold back the warp and to combat Tyranids in ways the Imperium can only envy. It is conceivable that the final battle for the galaxy's future might see Necrons and the younger races begrudgingly fighting on the same side against something truly horrific, though if that day comes, it will be an alliance of extreme necessity and likely dissolve the instant victory is achieved. Another motive that drives certain Necrons is the desire to reclaim what was lost on a more personal level, to restore their souls and organic bodies. When freed from the Satan's control, the Necron nobility remembered what they had sacrificed. Some were horrified at their new existence and yearned to undo the biotransference if possible. Over the millennia, cryptechs like Illuminor Xeris have relentlessly studied both Necron physiology and living creatures, hoping to glean a method to reverse or refine the process. It remains doubtful whether such a thing is possible. The Necrons' organic bodies were utterly destroyed, but they might find alternative means, perhaps by transferring their minds into cloned bodies or other forms of synthetic life that allow sensation and emotion once more. Indeed, Some Necron nobles speak in secret of a long-shot plan to capture and harness the power of the warp, the very energy they despise, to forge themselves new souls or bodies. Such talk is heresy among their kind, and dangerous in the extreme, but it highlights the depth of the tragedy they endure. For all their arrogance and cruelty, the Necron rulers are haunted by the knowledge of what they lost. Immortality for them has proven to be an eternal stagnation, a joyless perpetuity. In rare moments of reflection, a Necron overlord might wonder if it was truly worth it, but those thoughts, if they surface, are quickly buried under cold logic and millennia of embitterment. Philosophically, the Necrons embody the themes of immortality's curse, the loss of self, and the weight of ancient sin. They are a living, or unliving, testament to a civilization's overreaching hubris. In their relentless quest to avoid death, they became death incarnate. They gained eternity but lost their souls. The galaxy's inhabitants might see in the Necrons a dark mirror, a warning of what even humanity could become if it traded compassion and spirit for the promise of survival and order at any price. The Necrons feel no pity, no remorse, but that is not because they were always monsters. It is because they made themselves into monsters to escape oblivion. There is a profound sadness to their existence, visible only in rare cracks. A Necron lord who collects the artifacts and specimens of other cultures, perhaps trying to rekindle some spark of curiosity or beauty. A deranged Nemisor who still believes he's fighting honorable wars of a long-lost age, treating even enemies with a ghost of respect according to a code no one else remembers. Or the flayed ones who grotesquely wear the skins of the living, possibly driven by the last insane echoes of yearning for the flesh they themselves will never possess again. The Necrons are, in a sense, as tragic as they are terrifying, though that tragedy offers no comfort to those they slaughter. What role will the Necrons ultimately play in the fate of the galaxy? That remains uncertain. If they have their way, they will rule it absolutely, exerting a cold, immortal dominion where disorder is quashed and the warp's baleful influence is nullified. In such a future, the galaxy might indeed become a more stable place, but at the cost of being a tomb for all living ambition and diversity, a silent empire of undying lords and their mindless legions. On the other hand, if the Necrons' internal divisions or ancient regrets get the better of them, they might never achieve that unity of purpose. They could remain a scattered menace, dangerous but ultimately contained by the concerted efforts of other races. Or perhaps, just perhaps, they might inadvertently serve as saviors against a greater darkness, should a night come when chaos threatens to drown all reality, or the Tyranids to consume all biomass. The Necrons might be the only power with the means, and the will, to do the unthinkable and stop it. After all, they can take actions no one else can, like shutting off the warp or sacrificing entire sectors to deny prey to the Tyranids because they have no souls to lose and no lives to value except their own. In the grim darkness of the far future, the Necrons are both a lurking peril and a potential bulwark against worse perils. They stride forth from ancient sepulchres with the weight of ages behind them, utterly convinced of their right to rule and their eternal perspective. They remember a time when they were kings of all they surveyed, and they intend to see that time come again. The living of the galaxy, humanity, Eldar, Toh, Orc, and all the rest, now find themselves confronted with the re-emergence of these undying lords. Some will fight, some will flee, and some may attempt to parley, but ultimately the Necrons are beyond reach of reason or mercy. They have their own grand design that was set in motion before most species even crawled in the mud, and they will not be deterred by the protests of ephemeral beings who flicker and die in the span of a heartbeat. As the eerie green light of Necron eyes once more casts its glow across forsaken battlefields and silent tomb cities, one cannot escape a sense of haunting inevitability. It is as though the darkest legends of the cosmos have stepped out of time and into reality. The Necrons are here, awake and active in the 41st millennium and beyond, and their story is far from over. Whether they stand as conquerors, adversaries, or reluctant saviors in the final chapters of the galaxy's saga, they will have their part to play. Perhaps they will be the doom of all, or perhaps they will hold the line against the even greater doom lurking in the void. In a universe of endless war and encroaching darkness, the Necrons remain a cold, calculating presence, ancient beyond reckoning, patient beyond madness, and utterly determined to forge the future that they desire. The Silent King's final edict still resonates in their circuits. The Necrons will rise, and the galaxy will be theirs again by the blood of the living or the death of the stars themselves.